A reading from the Gospel of Mark. The disciples came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then the people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion. And they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him, but Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. This remarkable, colorful, jarring story that from the Gospel of Mark, where I think when we hear it, we can get so fascinated at this idea of spirits leaping from a man into a herd of swine, and them just the ludicrous image of them running down the hill into the sea. We can get so caught up in that image and trying to grapple with that I think we can miss something very important in this story. And I want to key in today on just two pieces of it. One is I want to think about that beginning of this account where we hear about the demoniac and what it was like to have this person who had been a member of their community, obviously connected to somebody in one of these towns or villages, who was so possessed, so ill, so not in his right mind, and so strong and powerful that no one had the strength to contain him. Shackles and chains could not contain him. And how terrifying and depressing and unnerving it must have been for the people in that area to have him running the hills and howling at the moon and beating himself up with stones. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible, heartbreaking image and frightening. So to have this image painted for us, and then the next time we hear about the people of the towns and villages who came out to see what was happening, they come and they see that very man sitting in his clothing and in his right mind, and they were afraid. I'm just so fascinated by that response. They were afraid. And it makes me wonder what's more frightening to us than somebody who's suffering with terrible illness or addiction or something that takes them out of their right mind. The sense of helplessness we have around that, the sense of grief and all of the bargaining we have to do to get okay with that kind of powerlessness in our life. What's worse than that? It looks like what's worse than that is a demonstration of God's power through this person of Jesus, that was even more frightening to these folks than when the demoniac was being battered by this mental illness or by the demonic forces, however they understood this, to think that they seemed to find it more frightening when he was well actually reminds me of some of the wisdom I've heard from my friends over the year in the recovery community, that sometimes when a person gets healthy, the system doesn't react, the system around them, be that family, friends, work, doesn't react very well because we get used to a level of partial health or unhealth. And as hard as that is, what we really don't want to be confronted by sometimes as communities of people is the possibility that actually people can be made well. And the person who is bringing this astonishing transformation in the demoniac, Jesus, is met with fear and then the request, please leave, please leave. We talk about not in my backyard. These people are saying, not in our backyard. We don't want this kind of amazing show of strength and power. And we don't want to be confronted by the news that the things that are unwell in our lives and in our society can be made well. We prefer just to, as hard as it is, leave them as they are. And so today, as we begin another week, I would like to invite us to think about the places in our own lives, whether it's our families, our friends groups, our work, our city, our country, the places where we have folks around us, or perhaps we ourselves are feeling oppressed by forces that feel beyond our control and that we feel powerless, against which we feel powerless. To invite God into that struggle, to invite Jesus into that struggle, and to ask for healing, to make ourselves available to God's healing grace and power in our lives. How will we respond if that healing occurs? Will we find that frightening? Will we welcome it? Will we ask God to please go away and leave our neighborhood if those sorts of miraculous shows of strength and glory and grace and power, if those are cropping up in our lives, what will our response be? So take that with you in prayer this day, this week. Perhaps lay before at least your own consciousness, if not your God in prayer. Lay before yourself. Perhaps just naming where are the places where you feel there's rampant unhealth around you, and how would you name that? And then imagine what it would be like to come and find that situation or that person or that dynamic miraculously healed, and finding Christ at the center of that, finding God at the center of that healing. What do you think your response will be? Do you feel like you'll want to ask God to please take a hike and not disturb my worldview, or will you be able to welcome that in and, like the demoniac, go out and proclaim the greatness of God's power and goodness in your life? So may you take that with you in prayer today, and may God bless you, and God bless you and keep you this day and always. Amen.